Hiya folks, it's Russ and Mark from TURAS, and I hope you can see us behind all that smoke there. This is one of our first webisodes around a trip that we did a while back to a place in the North Atlantic, which we think is probably one of the best four-wheel drive adventure destinations in Europe, if not in the world, and it's in Iceland. We've had tapes sitting in a drawer now for a long time. We finally got them out and we've edited them, and we put together 2 webisodes just to share our experiences of this incredible destination. Yeah, incredible is the right word. Of all the places that I've ever been, it's the place that I most want to go back and visit again. We were there for about 3 weeks, and while we saw a lot of stuff, it wasn't nearly enough time. You'd probably need months there to see it everything. Yeah, it was a superb place. And as I said, this is the first of what we hope to be a number of webisodes that we got coming out. If you want to subscribe, you can click on the link there. If you want to hit the bell, it'll notify you of future webisodes that we bring out. And we hope that this might be of interest to you. If it's a place that you've always thought about going to, this might hopefully give you a little bit of background or a bit of information as regards what you might expect by when you get there. But we highly recommend it, so hopefully you find this useful.
You're going to do a nice thing like that.
As good friends and camping and four-wheel drive enthusiasts, we wanted to take our vehicle somewhere remote that offered challenging terrain and a place like nowhere else in Europe. Iceland offers all of these things and much more. An island in the North Atlantic, located near the Arctic Circle and Greenland, it's one of the youngest land masses on the planet and is often referred to as the land of fire and ice. In our planning for this trip, we were keen to explore over a 3-week period as much as we could in this vast geographical active landscape. Spending most of our time off-road, we would visit volcanoes, geysers, hot springs, glaciers and camp at some incredible locations. This was going to be a real adventure. So when we went to Iceland, we went from Skrabstur in the north of Scotland, but you can no longer get a ferry from Skrabstur in the north of Scotland. You've got to go from Denmark if you're taking the ferry. Yeah, you need to make your way to Denmark first, and then there's direct ferries sometimes from Denmark to Iceland takes about 48 hours. Mm-hmm. Or if it's going via the Faroe Islands, I think the Faroe Islands are about 36 hours, and then Iceland is another 19 or 20 hours. 20 hours. Yeah. So when we went from Skrabstur, we went to the Faroes. We stayed on the night on the Faroes. The Faroes is a small little islands in the North Atlantic. I don't know, population 45,000 people. I think the main industry there is fishing. Lots of puffins there, small little birds. I think you can eat them once a year there. Apparently so, yeah. Just once a year, it's illegal to eat puffin, yeah. Yeah, I think so. Once a year you're allowed to have a puffin for your dinner. But yeah, really interesting place. It comes under Danish rule. Mm-hmm. The Faroes. It's a protectorate of Denmark, yeah. Yeah. Interesting history to it as well. They believe that the Irish monks were the first settlers in the Faroes, and they believe they also went on to Iceland, which is also quite interesting. In fact, there's a port in the Faroes called St. Brennan, which is named after an Irish monk called St. Brennan, who was a sailor. Famous explorer, sailor, yeah. Yeah, so it was pretty interesting for us. I mean, as I said, you can go from, if you're going to the Iceland, you go from mainland Denmark, you can do the direct route, which is, 2 days basically, 48 hours. 48 hours, yeah, and then, or if not, you can stop off in the Faroes, but a pretty interesting trip. So when you're arriving into Iceland, you come in through a fjord into, what's the name, Seyðisfjörður, something like that. That's brilliant Icelandic, Mark. So, Seyðisfjörður. Yeah, we come in to Seyðisfjörður, and that's the port where you arrive, and it's really interesting. It's a fjord, and we arrived there in the summertime. Was it August or late July? Late July. Yeah. And there was still ice caps. You could see them on the on the mountains in the distance. But yeah, so ferry arrived there. We disembarked. The interesting thing about this ferry is it's full of 4-wheel drive vehicles. In fact, you know, it's pretty amazing. You know, the amount of people who go there just to tour it in 4-wheel drives. It was great. There's so many like-minded people going to Iceland for that very reason, just to explore it. But yeah, so when we got in there, we started to make our way towards
Jökulsárlón Glacier Lagoon.
Jökulsárlón.
Yeah, well, I'm sure we're mangling the names.
We'll put the name on the screen there. Apologies to any Icelandic people who are looking at this, but pronunciation, some of those words are a little bit difficult. But yeah, so that place was just incredible. It's just an awesome lagoon.
Yeah, basically giant icebergs floating in it, and apparently it's getting a little bit bigger every year through erosion. So it's basically obviously salt water, but all these icebergs calving off glaciers up in the hills and coming down and going out to sea, and just an amazing sight. Yeah,
and even the journey getting to it. I mean, we were, you know, it was like you're only off the ferry and you feel like within 10 minutes you're on dirt tracks and you feel like you're on another planet.
Yeah, it's awesome, like another world, you know. Actually, they've filmed quite a lot of sci-fi films there. It looks so alien. Yeah.
And like and the first thing you experience is before we got to Jökulsárlón, we you know, you come across all these amazing waterfalls, and you really feel like you have arrived in a very different environment. But it was just amazing. So we stayed the night actually close to Jökulsárlón, and the one thing that I was amazed at was the amount of wildlife that was there. I mean, we saw seals, bird life. It was alive with wildlife. It was pretty amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing. I thought as well when we were camping after, you know, eventually went to bed. It didn't really ever get dark or that dark, but just the sound of the icebergs in the water. After a while, you know, there was melt and you'd hear a creaking and then a crash where like the surface of it had melted away, changed its center of gravity, and it had rolled over, and you know, just the sound was amazing. And then we saw them in the morning, the bottom were all covered in moss and stuff. It was a great introduction to the start of our trip. Yeah.
So from there, when we packed up in the morning, we heading towards the direction of Reykjavik. I mean, the thing about Iceland is that there is a ring road that goes around it, which is tarred, but most of the tracks in Iceland are dirt tracks.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I think the ring road, as you said, is paved, and obviously everywhere in Reykjavik is paved, and I presume all the towns as well, but all the internal roads are basically all just dirt tracks. Yeah,
dirt tracks. Yeah. So from there, from the glacier lake, where do we go from there?
Into that valley with the unpronounceable name.
Okay, so what was the name of that place? Okay,
we'll put it on the screen.
We'll put it on the screen. But this was
you try.
This was it was like you go from one sort of a landscape to another landscape, and they're just completely different. Yeah. You can go 60 kilometers, and it just changes. It changes very, very quickly. Yeah. And this was like, I don't know, the best way to describe it. It was, you know, there was a lot of molten lava that had solidified over hundreds of years, and it was covered in this kind of green moss, and it was just spectacular.
Yeah, it looked amazing. Again, like something from another planet. Really, amazing.
So we made our way through those tracks, and we arrived in that canyon, which was called Frigger.
I don't know.
Yeah, it's on the screen there. It's a long word. I hope it fits on the screen. But yeah, that was also pretty amazing. And like you know, the one thing you'll find with Iceland is the amount of waterfalls, and every waterfall you come across is just so different, and it's just incredible.
Yeah. No, absolutely awesome. And you know, another thing is just the difference in the geography and the features would change so rapidly. One minute you're driving through like a valley or a canyon, next minute it's like you're driving through a black desert, and just, you know, it's amazing that in such proximity, such different landscapes, you know.
Yeah. And that was only day 2.
Yeah.
So after we left that amazing canyon with that spectacular waterfall, we headed for Reykjavik. What was the name of that canyon again?
Well, we were trying to pronounce it earlier. We weren't having doing it justice, I think so, or just
Fjaðrárgljúfur.
So that's what it was called. But it was amazing. So after we left there, we headed for Reykjavik, and Reykjavik is the capital of Iceland, and I think most of the population live in Reykjavik.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's when you're driving into Reykjavik, it's the first thing that you notice is all the geothermal steam, is it?
Yeah. Well, I remember just thinking you're driving in towards Reykjavik and you see these columns of smoke, and in another city you might think, oh, it's industry or factories or something, but when we got closer we saw it was just geothermal smoke, or small vents or small volcanoes. It's mad.
It's mad, isn't it? Yeah. And in fact, the road that goes along the coast heading for Reykjavik is, it never freezes over in the wintertime because they have geothermal heat. Is it pipes that are going under the road or something that keeps the road dry in winter conditions, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah.
So we stayed the night in Reykjavik, and Reykjavik was kind of the start of our journey into the centre of Iceland. There's a campsite right in the middle of the city. We stayed in that campsite, went off and had a look around, and then the following day we packed up the vehicles and we headed for Tinvellir.
Yeah.
Tinvellir National Park. And so that brought us into
well, we went first to Silfra.
Sorry, Silfra.
Yeah.
Okay. So Silfra that was something you were looking forward to seeing.
Yeah, it's basically a gorge, or like a crack in the earth between the American and the European continental plates, North American and Eurasian plates, I think, and they're sort of slowly moving apart a couple of inches a year, but it's a fissure that's basically full of glacial meltwater, and you can actually go and you can scuba dive in between the continents.
Which we did. We got our dry suits and we rented them out, and we went with a professional diver, and we got to experience what it was like diving between the two continental plates, which was a really interesting experience.
Yeah, amazing. It was one unique experience on a dive to be, swimming along, whatever. You can take your regulator out of your mouth and have a drink of water and then put it back in again.
There's no life in that water.
No, I mean, I'm sure there might be microscopic life, but there's very little. There's no fish and there's no seaweed or anything. It's crystal clear, and actually you can see, because the water is so clear, you can see as far as there's something to see. It's only like if the rock turns or there's a corner, you couldn't see any further. It was amazing visibility. Yeah. And
you don't have to be a trained diver to do that. Mark is a diver. I'm not. But you can rent out your dry suits, and because it is very cold, you need a dry suit, and or you can go and get your tanks and go and explore it, and go down to a bit of a deeper depth or whatever, just to see what it's like. But it's pretty worth doing. So it is. We really did enjoy that. So after we did the whole Silfra thing, we headed for
Geyser.
Yeah. Okay, so that's one of the many geysers or geysers, whatever you want to call them, in Iceland. But that one's dormant, isn't it?
There's two beside each other. Geyser, which was a bigger one, which used to go up to, spout up to 70 metres into the air, and Stroker, which is the baby brother, which is still active, is about 30 metres. And over the years, Geyser stopped working. Apparently they have a lifespan anyway of maybe, I'm not sure, a few hundred years, but Geyser is actually the one that gave the English language the word geyser as well.
Okay.
But yeah, it's pretty much dormant. I think they can reactivate it by throwing chemicals into it or whatever they do, very occasionally, but it's basically dormant now. And Stroker is the one that you see in the videos and the photos.
And that's what makes Iceland such a great place to go to. It's just that the whole geothermal and the very fact that the island is pretty much alive. It's lots of volcanoes and lots of geothermal activity, and it's pretty interesting when you're driving along and you see all of these things happening all around you. So from there we then headed for,
I think we went to Gullfoss then.
Gullfoss. Okay. So Gullfoss was one of the big another one of the massive waterfalls. This is one of the biggest ones in.
Yeah, that's the big waterfall at the start of that Aliens movie, Prometheus, is it?
Okay.
Yeah, like it's enormous. Yeah, waterfall.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the second largest one in Europe.
Second. Okay, so that was pretty interesting. So yeah, if you're into photography, I think it's safe to say that Iceland is a photographer's paradise, really, because there's so many great opportunities to get great photographs of very diverse and very different landscapes, and it's just it's pretty amazing. So it is.
Yeah.
The next part of our trip was on the Sprenkedour track, and this was we were finally in the heart of Iceland. It's
it's a track, 400 kilometre long, rough dirt track that goes up into the mountains, and actually you go through between two different glaciers at the very top of it as well.
Yeah. This is a challenging track. There's a lot of corrugations. It's a very narrow track. It's like, I don't know, it's like driving through a desert with black sort of gravel, sort of grainy sand, and your vehicle will rattle. There's no doubt about it. I mean, the vehicles we had are behind us here, 2 Land Rover Defenders, and they're bog standard Land Rover Defenders. They were fine. There was no problems, but you will rattle your vehicles. It's a lot of corrugations.
Yeah. Well, I think we had 2 options for getting to Maivatn. We could go take this track, or there's another better road. But the better road is actually 200 kilometers longer, but it takes. Maivatn is 200 kilometers shorter than the longer road, but it takes twice as long to do this track.
Yeah, and this was the highlight for us. This track was the highlight for us for the trip, because this really did bring us right into the centre of Iceland, and it's pretty much why we went there. We were on the first part of that track. We did the first 200 kilometres. I think, was it in one day?
I think it took us about 7 hours.
7 or 8 hours
to do 200k.
Yeah. So we had planned to camp that night. As it turned out, it was about 2 o'clock in the morning.
Still
bright when we arrived, and we decided we wanted to pull up into camp. We pulled up near what's it called? It was had that kind of halfway mark. There was a hut. Yeah,
a mountain hut. Where with a campsite attached, and we were planning to set up our tents. Near in the campsite. But when we arrived there weren't actually any other tents up there, and we got out and we asked could we camp, and we were getting set up, and we very quickly realised that it was far too cold to camp. Like our hands started kind of numbing up almost immediately. So we decided to change the plan and see if we could get a place in the hut instead. So
it's like a mountain hut. It doesn't have any electricity. It's run by national parks, but we're on a much higher altitude, so that's why it was so cold.
Yeah. And also in between 2 glaciers.
And we're between 2 glaciers. But this hut was an experience in itself. We arrived into the hut. There was driving towards this hut, there was a lot of big 4-wheel drive vehicles, much bigger than our ones, and people from all over the world. But when we got into it, it was pretty packed. The best way to describe it, it was like, I don't know, it was like risen boards, and people were literally just lying down on their sleeping bags. I think we jumped in between a couple of Russians, but and lucky we were happy to be in it, because it was pretty cold. Yeah. But that was an interesting experience. In the morning we packed up, and after breakfast, and we started to make our way heading towards Maivatn.
Yeah. So there's another. That hut is about halfway, I think. So another 7 hours or another 200k to Maivatn.
Yeah. So expect plenty of corrugations in these tracks. It's really hard to gauge your tire pressures when you're doing this track, because it's pretty rough. You can't go really fast because you're kind of, you are ascending and you're descending a bit, and it's quite windy, and so it's slow driving. There's no question about it. But it was pretty amazing. And the thing about, before you come into my vat, you start seeing those kind of like mountains in the distance or hills in the distance, and it really is like driving on another planet. People talk about driving in Iceland, that it is really, very different to anything else you'll see. And the best way to describe it from the point of view of driving on that particular track, it's like driving on Mars or something, isn't it? It's just
And I mean, obviously it's a track that lots of people drive on, but having said that, we didn't see very many other vehicles. Obviously we saw them at the hut, but most of the time you're driving, you're not seeing any other vehicles.
I think we went 6 hours without seeing a vehicle on that track. So if you're looking for remote driving, this track is one that you really need to look at doing if you get to Iceland, because it's certainly going to give you that whole feeling of being in the middle of nowhere. I think it's probably the highlight for most people who go there. But yeah, we really did enjoy that. However, when we hit the Tar Macadam after how many hours of
14
hours, we were kind of happy at that stage as well. A lot of checking with the vehicles to make sure everything was okay and that bits didn't fall off. But yeah, they did well. So yeah, highly recommended the Sprengadauer track.
So basically, after we got off the track, basically that was 2 days of driving 400k, 7 hours a day with the mountain hut in the middle. We arrived back onto the asphalt just outside Maivatn, which is a very green area. It actually has one of the largest lakes in Iceland.
A lot of flies in it as well.
Flies as well, yeah. But a totally different landscape to everything that we'd been experiencing for the previous few days. Just, completely different. And Maivatn is also very close to an area called Krafla, which is one of the most geothermally active places in Iceland still. There's a caldera of a volcano called Viti, which is the Icelandic word for hell. And also at the foot of Viti there's a kind of a plain that's covered in all sorts of geothermal activity. So there's fumaroles, these kind of mounds that are steaming, boiling mud pots and steaming vents leaking gases and things like that. So that
the thing, the Viti that erupted in, I don't know, the
1700s,
1700s, and they say the volcano or the eruptions went on for 5 years. So it's mad. So yeah, that's definitely well worth having a look at. And then when we moved on from Krafla, we camped another night outside a nearby village, and then the following day we drove towards Aska, which is a stratovolcano sort of in towards the centre of Iceland, and basically parked the Defenders and hiked up to the caldera. And in the caldera there's two lakes. There's a large lake and a small lake, and the small lake is actually a thing called Viti as well. That's the one we swim in.
Yeah.
That was weird. Yeah. So it's you cannot, well, I'm not sure if you're supposed to be swimming in it, but there was people swimming in it, and we asked was it okay. So that the one or two people that were there said yeah, it should be okay. So we went into it, and it was very strange. You're swimming in the bottom of this active volcano, and it's, you're swimming along and you hit this really hot part of the lake, and obviously there's fissures or whatever underneath you, and so yeah, it's a bit of an eerie feeling, and it's probably, I don't know, it's a bit strange. Yeah, I don't think you probably should be doing it.
I don't know,
anyway, we did it. Yeah. But for me, like, Aska was one of the highlights of the trip for me, because if you're looking for that sort of a dusty sort of a experience, dusty tracks, it was just a great place to go through with your four-wheel drive. It's got all these ragged sort of rocks that are obviously molten from eruptions or whatever,
like kind of like basically solidified lava, serrated lava, and it's kind of been filled in a bit with sand,
like real soft basalt or whatever sand that gives you the whole dusty kind of feel. And it was just that was, for me, was another really great part of the journey, and unfortunately it was also the last real kind of interesting place we visited on the trip, and very different again from all of the other ones that we had done on our route. suppose the thing about going to Iceland is that there are, you know, if you've only got like 2 or 3 weeks to do your trip, you know, what we studied it carefully before we went it, but this was the one that we want to do. But there are other ones. There's one north of the island, there's ones more to the west of the island, to the east of the island, which we didn't get to experience, but the big part of this trip for us was doing the Stregs Springer track, and also getting to Myvatten and all that sort of stuff. So we were happy enough what we got done in a relatively short period of time. Yeah, it was pretty good.
Amazing, yeah.
Well, folks, that's pretty much it. That's our take on Iceland. We do hope that you got something from it and that you learned a little bit about it, and it might give you a bit of a flavour of what Iceland has to offer. We certainly had a fantastic time there, and we definitely want to go back there in the near future. Yeah. So if you want to subscribe, you can. The link is on the screen. We're going to be posting some more webisodes of trips that we've done. If you want to hit the bell, you can also do that, and that notify you of when we upload some new material. And so thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.
Cheers.